I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. Every so often, we will cover a story from a land far away. This one about an innocent man wrongfully convicted and then released after 30 years in prison. The luckiest of the unlucky is from Dallas, Texas, probably the antipodal of Montgomery County, Maryland, where the show is based. The storyteller, however, is local. Washington, D.C. journalist and author Barbara Bradley Haggerty, whose voice you may have heard on NPR, and whose 2018 article in the Atlantic magazine led the state of Texas to release Ben Spencer from prison in 2021. Whether he will be exonerated is not yet clear, but at least he is out now. Barbara Bradley Haggerty's book about him, called Bringing Ben Home, releases next week. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Alexandria, Virginia, art rock band Jackie and the Treehorns. Stephen Rubin and Pam Long on vocals, guitars, and piano. Frank Caputo on the bass and synth. And Brian Gibson on the drums.
The secrets we keep, exposing what's underneath. Do you have something to hide?
Barbara Bradley Haggerty, welcome to I Hate Politics.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Sunil.
Benjamin Spencer, a Dallas man who is black, was wrongfully convicted for a 1987 murder. He was released in 2021, in part because of the story you wrote in The Atlantic. You now have a new book, Bringing Ben Home, that goes over the case and its meanings and implications and impacts. What do you know now that you did not know in 2018?
I think I understood after reporting this story for The Atlantic how flawed the system is, how because of human error, whether it's, incentivized witnesses or police misconduct or prosecutors hiding evidence, whatever it might be, bad forensics, that stuff goes wrong and convicts innocent people. And I also knew that it's really hard to get out because of the system of our appellate system. I think what I didn't understand was how serendipitous it is. So because of my reporting, in part, there were 4 other people who were involved in this. We were able to get the evidence to a district attorney who had just been elected, a black man, a Democrat in Dallas. Before that, there had been 4 district attorneys that had been approached about Ben's case, and they all said, no. So the serendipity was that this new district attorney, John Creuzot, was actually open to it. That's serendipity. He had a background. He was black. He was a Democrat. He had seen wrongful convictions. He had a background to think, oh, okay, we're going to look at this. And then he got a prosecutor who's a bulldog to find even more evidence than what we had presented to them. Ben Spencer, is the luckiest of the unlucky in the sense that he had 2 lawyers, 2 investigators, a journalist, spending all this time and money, $250,000 on his case, just to get him before a court. He was so lucky to have that. Most people don't have that. Most innocent prisoners don't have that kind of media or investigative or legal firepower. Most people don't get their cases brought before a sympathetic district attorney. And so while Ben Spencer's case turned out well, if you can say that being incarcerated for 34 years is turning out well, but at least he got out. For other people, the serendipity is not there. They just sit in prison year after year after year with no one helping them. And I think that is really, really disturbing.
A complete luck of the draw.
Absolutely. It does. Yeah, there are estimated to be tens of thousands of innocent people sitting in prison who have not drawn the attention of investigators, of the Innocence Project, of Centurion Ministries, of the Dallas Morning News or the Atlantic or NPR. I spent a long time. I lived down in Dallas for a while. How many prisoners get a journalist to move to, from Washington, D.C. to Dallas for 4 months just to knock on doors, right? It's a complete luck of the draw.
Say a little bit about the circumstances that put Ben Spencer where he was.
The man who was killed was a young man named Jeffrey Young. He was 33 years old, had 3 children, happily married. The perpetrators put Jeffrey Young, attacked him at his office, put him in the trunk of his BMW, drove over the bridge into West Dallas, a poor Black area. Somehow Jeffrey Young bounced out of the trunk, got out or somehow, was left on the street. The perpetrators drove the BMW into an alleyway and then ran away. So initially no one saw the murder or no one saw the attack. The important fact about Jeffrey Young is that he was the son of one of Ross Perot's top executives. Now, Dallas, 1988, Ross Perot was the wealthiest man in Texas. He was about to run for president, and Ross Perot wanted this case solved. And so what did he do? He threw money at it. And so he offered a $25,000 reward. There was another $10,000 reward offered. Before the reward was out there, no one saw anything. They were deaf and blind. Oh, no, we didn't see anything. Then suddenly the reward comes out, $25,000 reward from Ross Perot. And suddenly 3 neighbors saw exactly who it was. They knew exactly. It was Ben Spencer and Robert Mitchell. They know them because they're both neighbors of theirs. Yes, they saw them from different angles. And, absolutely. After the police heard that a few days later, they arrested Robert Mitchell and Ben Spencer, put them in jail, and suddenly a jailhouse informant, Danny Edwards, comes to the police and says, hey, you know what? Ben Spencer, he confessed to me about this crime. Yeah, he did the murder. Danny Edwards was facing a 25-year sentence. As a result of his testifying in court, he got out 2 months after the trial. All Ben had going for him was an alibi. One woman, one teenager, one track star who was going to go to college the next year.
He was married by then.
Yes.
And his wife was pregnant.
Yes.
But he was out fooling with another woman who became the alibi.
Yeah, so that is a very uncomfortable fact in his story. The most kind of embarrassing and shameful moments of his life were the ones that he needed to repeat over and over again because they were his alibi. And jurors often dismiss alibis. Police dismiss alibis. Oh no, you must have said that just to protect him because he's a friend of yours. They had searched his home. They looked for, stolen items from the victim. They looked for bloody clothing. They, fingerprinted the car and the office and all of that. They did fingerprints of that. Nothing pointed to Ben. No stolen items, no bloody clothes, no fingerprints at the crime scene. Nothing connected Ben to the crime. And here were 3 witnesses who said they saw Ben Spencer.
What happens to discredited witnesses?
Well, if they're found to have been discredited really quickly, they face perjury charges. But the statute of limitations is like 2 years. It varies state to state. So basically, nothing happens unless it turns out that they're the perpetrator. But, that wasn't the case here. And the reward is given not for if you convict the right person. The reward is if someone is indicted. So, for example, some people think that Gladys Oliver, the state's star witness, thought that Ben would never be convicted, just indicted, and she'd get the reward, and Ben would never go to prison. I mean, we don't know that because we haven't been able to talk to her. I tried to talk to her, and she wouldn't talk to me. But nothing happens to you, and the standard for getting the reward is quite low.
The thing that is supposed to solve a crime perpetrates a second one.
Exactly. I went to Dallas 30 years after the crime and found lots of evidence. You can find witnesses, you can find people, the police never talked to, whatever. And so it's kind of shocking to me that you can actually undo a conviction 30 years after the fact. Right. It's amazing to me. But one thing that Daryl Parker, who was this investigator who teamed up with me, he was interested in Ben's case. He was working at pro bono. One thing that we both found is that when you just show up places, people talk to you. So we tracked down the jailhouse informant, Danny Edwards. Now, this is a guy who said, who said wild things like Ben confessed, and he was sure that his fingerprints wouldn't show up on the car or the crime scene because he wiped his fingerprints on the cement and rubbed them off. We go to his last known residence and knock on the door, and the people say that they don't know who he is. 8 people live in this one 2,000 square foot house. They say they don't know who he is. And so we're leaving. And then this woman waves at us. And we go over there and she goes, "I'm Danny Edwards' fiance. Do you want to talk to Danny?" We said, "Yes, we want to talk to Danny." And so she gives us a cell phone number and we call him and make arrangements to meet him the next morning. And, we find this guy who's holding his little pit bull puppy named Queenie. And he gently puts it down. And we talk to him. And he's like, "No, Ben didn't confess to me. He was just saying they said he did it. He never said he did it. He didn't confess." He goes, "Look, they told me that he told the police I did it. So look, he lie on me, I lie on him, the best liar wins. That's the way the game is played. I can take any story and make it better. The police give me details, I make them better than they were before." Yeah, no, Ben didn't do it. And so finally, he goes, "So remember, this is like 2017, 30 years. Ben's been in prison 30 years. He goes, "So how is Ben anyway?" And I go, "Danny, he's in prison." He goes, "He's still in prison?" "Yeah, he's been in prison for 30 years. And then Daryl goes, "How does that make you feel?" Like, shit. That's what he said. And he agreed that he would sign an affidavit, recanting his statement. And of course, then he kind of committed another crime, and COVID came along, and he was lost to the wind. So we never quite got that affidavit. But what is remarkable is, you think about time being the enemy of truth, right? Because witnesses die and, evidence gets thrown out and things like that. But time is actually also a friend of truth, that witnesses, relationships change. Witnesses no longer have a reason to lie. They won't be, prosecuted for perjury anymore. Things just change. And you go back there and you suddenly find that these witnesses who were key to Ben Spencer's conviction are saying, "No, we were wrong. We didn't do it. He didn't do it.
The first DNA exoneration happens in 1989, just within a few years of Ben Spencer being put away in prison. How has DNA technology changed criminal justice, and where has it not, such as clearly with Ben Spencer?
What happens with DNA technology is you get to an end result, conviction, and then DNA shows, wait, no, this person didn't do the rape. This person's DNA was not found at the murder scene. We got the wrong guy. So then you have to go back and look at what was it? What went wrong in that original conviction? And you suddenly begin to see all the flaws in the system. You see jailhouse snitches, jailhouse informants who lie to get a better deal. You see incentivized witnesses. There is now a lot of research about faulty eyewitness testimony, even when they think they're testifying correctly. You see misconduct by police. Did you know that police are allowed to lie? Lie, like say to a suspect, your DNA was found at that scene. Your co-defendant, he's already confessed and said that you were the mastermind. They're allowed to do all of that stuff. They get false confessions, like right and left. Prosecutors hid evidence. Ben Spencer was convicted once. Then it turns out that the state star witness lied on the stand. So that conviction was vacated. And they offered him a deal. They said, look, we'll just charge you not with murder, but with aggravated robbery, and you'll be out in 3 years. And Ben's like, I didn't do this crime. I'm not going to plead guilty to a crime I didn't do. So he goes back to life. He gets convicted and is in there for life. He immediately starts writing all sorts of people. But back then in 1988, which is when he got the life sentence, the Innocence Project had not been born yet. The only group that was doing this kind of thing was Centurion Ministries, this minister up in Princeton, New Jersey, right? who basically found his call not to the pulpit, not to the people in the pews, but to the wrongly convicted. And so he began writing. Well, he began writing, and they would write back. He came on their radar, but they couldn't get to his case for another 12 years. Why? Because they're a small group of volunteers. This is the problem. Small group of volunteers. They privilege death row cases because there's an actual expiration date, right, when someone is executed. And so he had to wait for 12 years. The thing that attracted their attention, I think, is the complete lack of evidence against him.
So, how important in the work of, say, the Centurion Ministries or Innocence Project or, these groups is the fact that you need a alternative perpetrator, at least a theory of a perpetrator, in order to get your person off?
You don't necessarily need a name for an alternate perpetrator. Like, say they find the DNA of a rape victim. They find DNA that is not the innocent prisoner, right? But that DNA is not in the database. They won't have the name of the perpetrator. They won't have that name, but they will know he wasn't the perpetrator. With non-DNA cases, I think you really do need the name of an alternate suspect, because otherwise there's no way to kind of investigate like what was, in this case, in Ben Spencer's case, what was Michael Hubbard doing that night? He had a history of this kind of violent act and this kind of violent robbery. What was he doing? And you wouldn't know who to investigate without an alternative suspect.
So in 2008, there was a judge who was convinced that Ben Spencer was innocent. But that determination came up later on to the committee and was turned down.
Right. Okay. So in Texas, and there are a couple of other places, like I think Oklahoma is this way too, a judge can find that someone is innocent, but can't release him. He or she has to get permission of the high criminal court in Texas, the Court of Criminal Appeals. Now, the Court of Criminal Appeals basically has never met a conviction it doesn't like, right? I mean, they almost, even in death penalty cases, they almost always uphold convictions. And, there's a reason for that. I mean, appellate courts don't like to overturn jury verdicts. They're like, you know what? The jury was there, sitting, hearing all the evidence, looking at the witnesses, looking at the defendant, deciding on the credibility. We weren't there. We judges weren't there, so we're going to trust the jury. But in the Texas case, it's pretty stunning that a judge who has an evidentiary hearing hears all the evidence, hears the evidence about the alternative suspect, is convinced that that evidence is more viable than the evidence against Ben Spencer, finds Ben Spencer should be freed based on innocence, that the Court of Criminal Appeals says no.
So, what changed in 2021 when Ben Spencer was actually released?
The strategy was actually really smart. It was devised by Ben's new lawyer, the guy who joined the team, Gary Udishin. And what he said is, look, we lost on the prime the innocence round. Let's just do a fair trial. The DA can get behind that. And then all the justices have to do is say, you know what, we agree with the DA. Yeah, he didn't get a fair trial. Okay, that's a lower standard. What's wonderful about that is that now that the Court of Criminal Appeals has said, yeah, he didn't get a fair trial, they never see the case again. Now it's up to the DA to decide what to do. We're hoping, and that could happen any day now, we're hoping that he dismisses based on innocence, in which case Ben's name is cleared and he gets compensated for those 34 years in prison, $2.7 million.
Do you know if there have been other cases where this strategy has been tried and worked? Or is this unique to Ben Spencer?
Generally, what happens, every case I know about, what happens is the DA comes along and says, we think he's innocent, and supports that. And the Court of Criminal Appeals, because the DA has supported it, will often go along. Usually there's DNA involved. There's one case that I know about, Ben's friend, where there was no DNA, but the evidence was so overwhelming and everyone recanted that the Court of Criminal Appeals agreed that he was innocent.
So is the correct strategy then to work for the election of DAs that would do this?
It all comes down to electing the right DA. In 2006, the new district attorney, actually a Black man, created something called the Conviction Integrity Unit. And that's a unit within the district attorney's office that now has been replicated all over the country, where the prosecutors are able to take a second look at questionable convictions. People can petition them, say, look, I think there's DNA in this case, whatever. And they can take a look at it. And they can, what's good about having the DA do this or a prosecutor do it is they can walk into the police and say, we want to see all your evidence. And what they discover is lots of stuff that defense attorneys can't get at. I mean, that's what happened in Ben's case. They found so much stuff in the files that showed that the star witness had received a reward. They found so much that showed that prosecutors ignored obvious evidence of innocence. They found it was all there. As the district attorney said, the troubling thing is it was all there. We just weren't honest about it.
You have a chapter in the book where you say that Ben Spencer's conviction came under the shadow of Henry Wade, the famous Dallas district attorney, who is the Wade in Roe v. Wade, and who built the DA's office in Dallas. He did retire shortly before Ben Spencer's case, but his shadow loomed for a long time.
Henry Wade's shadow was cast for a very long time because all the prosecutors he trained up remained for a long time. The subsequent Dallas, district attorneys were in Henry Wade's mold. He was more charismatic, he was more famous, but they just kept on with his procedures. It wasn't until 2006 that a black DA was elected who thought that they may have been convicting the wrong people. It wasn't until then. So all those years, there were wrongful convictions happening. And it turns out that from the Wade era, they have found out about you don't reinvestigate a case if someone has died in prison, right? So this is going to be a smaller sample than it should be. But they found out that more than 30 people were wrongly convicted under Henry Wade before 1987, when he retired in January of 87. So, but they kept convicting essentially blacks for year after year after year. And it wasn't until 2006 that they began to change things.
And in the last 20 years or so, they have managed to change.
Yes. Part of it is that Dallas and Austin and Houston have become blue. So they elect Democratic district attorneys. I mean, the other part of it is that there have been so many meltdowns in Texas. I mean, in the Houston crime lab, the forensics it was catastrophic. The evidence was put in places where it was rained on and corrupted, and the people who tested for DNA didn't understand DNA, and the people who were looking for blood samples didn't know how to use the system. I mean, they were untrained. They were convicting one person after another. And what happened in Houston was kind of shaking up everyone in Dallas, because they found their crime lab was so bad that they shut it down for several years and built it from the ground up. Now they've got the best crime lab in the country. People think of Texas as this completely red, execution hungry state where they cut all the corners judicially. Texas is actually just about the most progressive state in the country as a result of its background and the fact that it still executes people.
Now, I am wondering whether this impetus to reform, has to include some legislative action as well. It's not just up to the DAs.
And that's where you're seeing laws about the prosecutor has to turn over evidence. That was to the defense attorney, which is very, very helpful. That was a law enacted in Texas. Or the use of jailhouse snitches. You have to be very careful about them. That was enacted by the legislature.
So I'm wondering whether this process of reform may justify more broadly the appeal of Trumpism and MAGA, in a sense that if they could reform being red, then what's wrong with being red?
No one likes wrongful convictions. No one. Red, white, blue. No one likes wrongful convictions. No one likes unfairness. Just anecdotally, Ben and Deborah Spencer, Ben is out. They now go to First Baptist Church of Dallas. That is where Robert Jeffress is the pastor. Robert Jeffress is Trump's biggest supporter. It's a completely red church. They're very Trumpy. They love Ben Spencer. They are outraged about the wrongful conviction. They have given him these are people in the church. They just walk up, give him, an envelope, and there's $300 in it. They've helped him buy a car. They've helped him, replace his gold tooth with a porcelain crown. He is a rock star at this church. He gives talks. He leads Bible studies. What I'm saying is that we have to distinguish between Trumpism and people who vote for Trump, because I think people who vote for Trump, their sense of fairness hates an injustice like this.
Ben Spencer is a religious man today and has been for 30 years.
Yes.
He's now part of a mega church whose pastor is a Trump acolyte.
Yes. How do I explain that? Okay, let me explain it.
How does he explain it?
So he just goes to church where Deborah goes. He would like to go to a smaller church. Deborah joined this church way before Trump. She joined the choir. It's her set of friends, right? She has a really
Before you go further, I said Deborah is his wife.
Deborah is his wife, right? And so she has really close friends. She's on the choir. When you look at the jumbo screen, she's the only black face of the choir that's shown. but she loves that church. She has her friends there. And I would say that the friends they might be abortion is a pretty universal thing for conservative Christians to be against, right? So I think they're all against abortion, but they're kind of open-minded. So within their set, they are really open-minded about the stripped-down faith, about Ben, about how you treat people within their friendship group. I think they think that being there is doing good because Ben has become a really large figure in this community, and more people know about wrongful convictions, and they're thinking about the fairness of the justice system. He gives talks, he leads Bible studies. It's as if, in a way, if you were going to play someone strategically to change a lot of minds and hearts, send them to First Baptist Dallas, right? So I think that's what they see their reason for being there is they're change agents.
Barbara Bradley Haggerty, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for writing a book about Ben Spencer that we can all learn from.
Sunil, thank you. This has been great.
That's journalist and author Barbara Bradley Haggerty. Her latest book, Bringing Ben Home, chronicles the life of Ben Spencer, who was wrongfully convicted of murder in Dallas, Texas in 1988, and was released in 2021 when a new DA took office and found evidence that was brought to light by an article she wrote in the Atlantic magazine. Ben Spencer is yet to be exonerated. You can find the Amazon link to the book in the show notes. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analyses. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producer, Adama Gay, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Alexandria, Virginia alt rock band, Jackie and the Treehorns. Steve Rubin and Pam Long on vocals, guitars, and piano. Frank Caputo on bass and synth. And Brian Gibson on drums. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you will subscribe, share, and rate the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home, and sometimes far away. See you next time.
Give it some time and I'll be front page news. I tell you what, I've got nothing more to lose. I might be too much for you to explain. My own persistence ends in mortal